Well, welcome to this live event on men's mental health. Before we kick off, we'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Conscious Conversations acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So welcome everyone. My name is Maritza Barone and I'm one of the founders of Conscious Conversations, along with Tamzeen Walsh, who is also here with us today. You can see her somewhere there in the room. It's our company's mission at Conscious Conversations to spark genuine and meaningful conversations to help people connect on a deeper level. And that's what today is really all about. We're wanting to connect everyone and be able to share this conversation openly. And this topic, men and mental health, is an important topic that will really allow men to normalize sharing how they feel, which we know can be very hard to do at times. And today we have some very, very special guests with us to share this conversation with. Needing little introduction, we've got Mr. Paul Roos, ex-AFL legend, wellbeing ambassador, speaker and broadcaster, to name a few of his accomplishments. Welcome, Roosie.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here. And we've got Matthew Richardson, another ex-AFL legend, commentator and wellbeing ambassador. Welcome, Richo.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me today.
You're welcome. Thank you. And John Toomey, of course, a wellness thought leader, resilience expert, speaker and author. And I think we call him JT in the world of nicknames.
Thanks, Maritza. It's really good to be here.
Yes, it is. We've been trying to get this together for a while, so I'm glad to have you here. And of course, Tony Rabah, founder and CEO of the Male Hug, who are partnering with us today for this conversation. Welcome, Tony.
Great to be here, Maritza.
Tony, what do they call you in the mate world?
Big Tone, I don't know.
Big Tone. I love the whole nicknames that men give each other. I think it's a great little thing that men do that women don't do as much of. So welcome to all of you. As I mentioned, the mental health of men has been an important topic long before the pandemic and the lockdowns and everything that we've been going through. So it's definitely a topic that's on all of our minds and something that, you know, we really need to focus on. And, you know, as a woman, I know that sharing my emotional state comes quite easily and I suppose is more expected within society. However, generally speaking, men can handle their emotions quite differently and perhaps tend to withdraw a lot more than women do when something is bothering them. So I might start by asking the question about what are the spoken and unspoken expectations of men sharing their feelings openly? And I'll probably start with you, John, if that's okay. In your experience, how do you think men feel about how they'll be perceived if they openly share their emotions?
Thanks, Maritza. I mean, it's a great question. And I think that perhaps the first thing I'd like to say is that in a lot of cases, men have no back off in showing their anger, which is an emotion. So I think it's more the emotions that give off a sense of vulnerability, like sadness or grief or hurt or those sorts of things. Whereas the stronger emotions like anger come off very easily. And it's funny that oftentimes men are made wrong for showing their anger. And, you know, a healthy expression of anger is fine as long as you don't hurt anybody, you know. So I think there's a couple of issues there. Regarding showing emotion, I reckon there's a lot of difference with different generations. Younger generation now, I think I get a sense that younger guys are more open to expressing how they feel and showing it publicly, whereas older generations, and you know, probably just about classify myself there as well, it was something that was seen as a bit of a weakness. And, you know, having grown up in a pub, I saw many men express anger, but very few express any other the emotions that would make them appear in their mind to be vulnerable. So I guess really it's about a preparedness to be vulnerable and to let go of that sort of that armor, I suppose. And you know, that could stem back to a lot of things. It may not be so much upbringing. It could be the fact that we came out of a world war, you know. It's an interesting thing. But yeah, I think it's the vulnerability that's a real interesting issue here.
Paul, I'd like to ask you the same question, actually. What do you think, how do you think men are perceived when they open themselves vulnerably and share who they are? Do they feel judged generally? Do they feel shame?
I don't think so. I think J2 made a good point around generational. I think, like, I got two boys that are 25 and 27, and I'm 58. I mean, my father, if you look at the generations, my father, we'd sit around the dinner table and we wouldn't, there was no I love yous and, how was your day sort of thing. It was pretty stoic sort of conversations around the table. I think for me as a dad, with all due respect to my dad, and I hope my kids have the same view, that I want my kids to be better men than I was, and I hope I'm a better man than my dad was. And I don't say that in any disrespect. He was an amazing human being. And I think in that regard, this new generation are much, much better, at actually expressing their views. I think my generation, I don't want to say guarded, but we're just, the way we communicate is just slightly different, and I think we do open up and we do talk, but it's probably giving permission to your mate to be able to do that, or giving time and a bit of a pause in the conversation. I always talk about the second question. The first question is, a BS question, how are you? That's just, it's the follow-up question that's the important question. No, how are you? How really are you? But I think sometimes men stay at that first question and maybe don't recognise the second question. But I definitely think generationally, having been involved in footy for 40 years, I've noticed a big difference when I started football to when I finished coaching the Melbourne Football Club. So I think it's great. I think, the new generation is learning to be able to, I love you, and, how you going and how I can help you. And so their language is vastly different, which I think is a real positive.
Yeah, I agree with that, Roosy. I think it's really changed. I reckon the younger generation now are almost teaching our older generations, and I'm in my mid 40s now, and I reckon I'm sort of in between sort of you two guys there. And I think that the younger guys now are teaching us older guys how to be a bit vulnerable, how to express ourselves more. I certainly know, and I take it back to football, as Roosy did. When I first started here at Richmond, and even in my junior days in Tassie, it was a one size fits all sort of philosophy with the guys at a footy club. You had to sort of, dig deep back, sort of be hard and tough. You couldn't show your emotions, and sort of everyone got treated the same. Whereas I think now they treat everyone individually on a different level. They encourage you to be vulnerable and open up and express yourself more and say, I love you. You're right, Roosy. I never heard that in my house growing up, and we all loved each other, but we never said it to each other. Whereas, my group of mates now, my close mates, we tell each other we love each other, on text messages and on WhatsApp groups. But that's only been a recent thing. It's only happened probably into my early to mid 40s that I've been able to do that with my friends, and it's been because of this younger generation, and probably even at the Richmond Footy Club, following them closely and looking at their success that they had. And it was all based around being vulnerable and expressing, your emotions to each other. And I think when you do that, you get trust between each other. And that was something that I really learnt probably from that Richmond Footy Club and the success they've had recently. And I've been able to sort of take that into my group of mates. And there's just a quick story here about sort of my generation and how switched off we can be. It was only recently in a close group of friends of mine that we found out one of our mates had actually been depressed since he was 21, but he had never spoken to anyone about it. And he's 46 now, and he's recently suffered some real trauma in his life with his marriage and his work situation, lost his job. And it was only hitting rock bottom in those situations that he finally opened up and said that, you know, he'd been depressed since he was 21. He hurt his back when he was 21 quite badly, and that started the whole downhill spiral. But it took 25 years for him to actually speak about it with his mates. We had no idea. So yeah, that was just one example of our generation, I guess, and we're just learning to be more open with each other now.
It can be amazing what the triggers can be that sets that off, and how it spirals out of control over a period of time. And like you said, people can be struggling for so long and their close network may not even know about it. But I loved how you said, and that you've all said, there's been a shift with generations, and we've seen an improvement going along the way. And as we get sort of younger, we're getting better with being able to communicate. I absolutely love seeing that. I mean, Tony, what have you seen in the corporate world? I know these guys have shared their perspective from sort of the sports world. You're more situated in the corporate side of things. How have you found the mental health side of what men are dealing with on that end?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, look, the male hug was born off the back of what I'd seen in the corporate world for 20 odd years. And most men, accountants, lawyers, you know, people within the financial services sector just wouldn't open up. I mean, you're dealing with clients, you're looking after their financial well-being, but you're not going to expose vulnerability. It's very, very hard. As Roosie said there, you know, people ask, how are you? Very sort of minimal conversation, but I believe the true way to healing is to be very raw and open and have really hard conversations. That's when you bring everything out. But certainly the corporate world has a long way to go because people don't want to be vulnerable in front of each other or around each other. You've got to build that trust. Very fortunate. I've got some close friends that I can open up to when I have to because it works. But yeah, the corporate world, I think, has got a long way to go. And that's why the male hug is focusing on that professional male. There's still a long way to go there.
I think on that, I just read this recent study, JT, you might have seen as well. I can't remember the exact titles, but because we do a lot of work in the corporate world now, but there was 3 titles, something like the hero leader, it was the technical leader, that was an actual term, and then there was the vulnerable leader. And the great thing about the study is the vulnerable leader has done far better in the pandemic than what the hero leader and the technical leader done. And I think that's really worth noting, Tony, from your point of view, because we are starting to see a little bit of a shift of performance by design, and we're encouraging people to share their stories. And Brene Brown does some really good stuff around vulnerability and psychological safety. And I think, Richo, what footy clubs have done way better than the corporate world is created a really psychological safe environment. Really good footy clubs create psychological safety. And for those of you, I'm sure you all understand what it is, but it's basically, you know, the ability just for everyone to have a voice and everyone to open up, no matter how long you've been there, whether it's your first day on the job or you've been there for 20 years, no matter where whether you're from, overseas or you're from Tassie or Melbourne or India or America, or no matter where you are. And I think football clubs have done incredible, and the transformation that I've seen in a, as Richo said, in a brutal environment, is incredible. And I think if the football clubs can do it in a obviously a male dominated environment, we've got AFLW now, which has been incredible to bring, women into a football club, which has been great as well. But, in my time, specifically men, but that psychological safety is really important. But I thought that was a really telling study, Tony, around the vulnerable leaders or the authentic leaders have had way more success over the last 18 months through the pandemic than the hero leaders and the technical leaders.
You're spot on, Roosie. I can tell you the amount of CEOs and leaders that have reached out to me personally to say, well done on the male hug. You guys are doing a fantastic job, but they're doing it discreetly. And that's the issue still, that they won't open up themselves. Yeah. They're trying to deal with so much. And that's what we're trying to do, break them down so that they can actually pass that on to their, their teams.
I think in the broader community and in a lot of workplaces, it would still be quite old school with men. I still reckon they'd really struggle to be able to open up. And I think we've been fortunate to be involved in the industry we are with, like Brucey just said, the footy industry, which has really encouraged, men to share their emotions and be vulnerable. But I still think in the wider community, I think it's still a big issue for men to actually be able to open up and speak and talk about their issues and their emotions and the trouble they may be having at home or the workplace. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, though.
Well, you made a good point, great point, Richo, is it's the younger generation that's teaching us, which I think is fantastic. I think that's a really important part because, habits are really hard to break. It's really hard to break a habit when you're 58 years of age and, when you're a young kid growing up in Donvale and, JT, you and I are similar age, but it isn't it? Like when your habits are formed over years. So it's so good to see that younger generation having those conversations and really opening up. And I think that's encouraging the older generation to be a bit more vulnerable, and because it doesn't matter how it happens, does it? No one, it's not about taking credit or how we get there, as long as we get there, as long as someone is driving the change. I think it's fantastic for that generation. And so I take my hat off to them. I think they're doing an amazing job, having those conversations and spreading the love and having more meaningful, deeper conversations.
Interesting. There's a couple of things in all that. I think the discussions there have really highlighted what you said before, Paul, about the second question. Like really stepping into that space to really inquire. And I suppose that means if they feel something's a bit off with their mate, is to hang on to that feel and pursue it. But there's a couple of lessons around that too. I grew up in pubs, and one of the things I used to notice when blokes were having a chat to their mate, and it was a bit of a sensitive chat, they did it standing side by side, not toe to toe. And I think standing beside a bloke or sitting beside a bloke sort of gives him the space, rather when you're looking him in the eye, it may be not so great. But the other thing that I was just thinking about when you were talking to, Paul, is that, and also you, Matthew and Tony, is that, the archetypes that shaped my consciousness when I grew up were a little bit different to the archetypes that shaped my son's consciousness. And for me, it was John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Charles Bronson, Teddy Whitten, Ron Barassi, and all men that exuded this hardness and toughness, and it's almost like you've got no flaws. So if you have some, you hide them, and I spent a lot of my life hiding my flaws. But now we see these icons, younger icons, who are much more open and much more fallible and much more, prepared to be vulnerable. And I think that's part of the world evolving too.
I love what the young leaders in talk about footy again in recent times. You're allowed to have fun too. You're allowed to be happy. I remember footy clubs. I remember you'd have a win and you'd have to walk off the ground with a stern look on your face. So don't show that you're happy that you've won, because, the opposition, don't give them any bait. Whereas you look at the players now, they're laughing and joking when they come out on the ground. They're laughing and joking after they lose, they win. And they're encouraged to show their emotions, whether they're happy or if they're down. And I think that's another fantastic, lesson that I've got in recent times from these young men and young leaders, that, you can show your emotions in all different ways. Whereas when I first started, you could have the best game of your life. You could win by 20 goals, but you had to almost walk off the ground flat as a tack because you couldn't show any emotion. So I've really enjoyed watching like a Max Gawn this year and the way he's led his footy club, and Trent Cotchin in recent times. It's, I think it's fantastic what they're doing, that age group.
I'm spot on, Matthew, because there was something that really caught my attention a few years ago. It might have even been in the same season. It was when Hawthorn won their premiership with Sam Mitchell as the captain, I think. And maybe the same year or the year after that, the North Queensland Cowboys won the premiership, and Jonathan Thurston basically won it off his own boot. And in both of those games, when everyone was out on the field having all their celebrations, the camera panned across to Sam Mitchell, and he was sitting on the ground with his little daughters climbing all over him, and all of his attention was on his daughters. And at the same point with Jonathan Thurston, as he'd done those superhuman feats, when the camera went to him, there he was sitting on the ground with his daughter on his lap, and that's all that mattered. And those guys felt totally safe to do that. They didn't have to be running around hollering and cheering. They could just do what was important to them. And I just thought, wow, they are such profound impressions that the young lads of today are seeing when they're growing up, whereas you would never have seen that when I was a kid.
Ah, good point. The families weren't even couldn't even come into the rooms, in the mid-90s, early 90s. It was just a total male-dominated area. You couldn't have your family in there, or your partner, or your kids. So yeah, that's another good lesson.
Another great set of shifts that are happening. I think what you've raised, there's a lot of good points there, and empathy and vulnerability are being celebrated now, both in our personal lives, in our families, and also in leadership. I remember empathy in leadership was a dirty word many years ago, not even that long ago, to be honest. Myself, even as a woman, I remember when I was in a leadership position doing a personality test and having my empathy levels just through the roof. And that was seen as a very bad thing because it looked like I was a weak person. But I know now, looking back, reflecting on that, that's not weakness at all. And I love that that's being celebrated now. I feel that that's a really important thing, both for men, women, whoever's in leadership positions. And I suppose we've had leaders in front of us constantly at the moment on the news, and they're doing a questionable different jobs, but we won't get into that. But we're watching how different leadership is being played out. And I feel like the more empathy that we could inject into that, the reaction with people would be much, much better. There was something else that was brought up, Richo, and you talked about who we open up to, and having that close knit circle. Do you think it's integral to who we open up to can make a big difference to how we share? I mean, having a close group of mates, or 3 or 4 people, even one person in your life where you're able to say, you know what, I've got a problem, I need to be able to talk to you about it, and I know you won't go telling everyone. That safety net of who you can speak to is critically important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as I used that example before, a close group of mates of mine, mates since school days, and he couldn't open up until he really hit rock bottom. And we really feel bad about that. Like, why didn't he trust one of us to open up? So yeah, I think it's crucial. I mean, if my friend had been able to open up 10, 15 years ago, things would be a lot different for him now, no doubt, instead of locking it away. So yeah, I think it's really important. I think everyone needs that close confidant that they can share anything with. I think that's crucial to any relationship and any person to be able to do that. But it's not easy. A lot of people don't. I mean, there's so many guys that would still, and particularly at my age group, I reckon you can go one or two ways at this point. And this is where I've got interested in this space in recent years. I've just seen a lot of mates lose, mentally they're struggling, which then leads to, they lose a bit of pride in how they look, and they don't look after themselves physically. And then that probably ends up turning into sort of, other areas that they then abuse, whether it's alcohol or, not looking after themselves. So I think at this age, I think it's a really crucial time for men in their mid-40s to be able to open up to each other and, get their life on track. Because I think you can go one or two ways at this point, mentally and physically. So yeah, crucial to have someone you can speak to and let it out and talk to about anything.
You're absolutely spot on, Rich. I was just going to say that in the corporate world or the professional world, a lot of blokes will do a zillion hours, working, and then they'll, go to the pub and have a drink, let themselves go completely, not talk to anybody. They might start dabbling with drugs, but and that's why our buddy program is so important. We get calls or emails from people looking to speak to someone. They've got no one to talk to. And they don't trust people within their own circle because they fear that information might be sort of let out and makes them look pretty silly. So it's incredibly important that people just reach out and talk to somebody. Just let it out.
I'll tell you a good way that I've noticed with groups of my mates is that just to have a WhatsApp group and reconnect with people that way. Not everyone likes getting on the phone and talking, and we've all got our different lives and families. It's hard to catch up, and particularly in the last 2 years, no one's been able to catch up here in Melbourne. So I reckon a WhatsApp group is a great way to stay connected with your friends. And I even think on those groups, you can tell when maybe someone's struggling because they don't respond to anything. And it's an easy way to pick up if someone's probably not feeling good, they're not responding to messages. And after a few weeks, that's when you pick up the phone and check in and see if they're okay, because they withdraw from the group and the chat on the WhatsApp. So I've found that it's been a really good tool in the last couple of years to stay connected.
Yeah.
I love that. Paul, how do you stay connected with mates? What are your, big tips? I know you've gone from this massive AFL career and now you're into mindfulness and well-being. I think your wife's a meditation teacher. I did one of her lessons with Wanderlust the other day. I mean, you're involved in this world of mindfulness now and obviously have so much knowledge around how to connect, but also look after your own self, your own internal self. Can you give us some advice on, best ways to look after your personal self and ways that we can adapt from that?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical. So it has to start with yourself. I think it's so important because, to Tony's point before, in the corporate world, and we talk about, we do a lot with senior exec teams and CEOs, et cetera, et cetera. One of the main messages we give them is to look after themselves. Don't get to that point that Richo's talking about. But it seems to be this badge of honour. The number of times I heard people, speak to me over the last 4 or 5 years, I haven't had a holiday for 2 years. And they say it like it with pride. And I'm like, are you an idiot? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, no one's that important. I just don't understand the logic behind that. So I think it's a great point. You have to start with yourself. So if you, I talk a lot about routine, get into a routine. And unfortunately, even in the world that I've been in for so long about sport, some of these ridiculous diets and some of these ridiculous exercise routines and some of this ridiculous garbage that you read and people promote, it's just not sustainable. My thing is just find something that works for you. If you like walking the dog, walk the dog. If you do like meditating, meditate. If you want to do some breathing exercise, do some breathing exercise. If you like riding the bike, ride the bike. But I think it has to start with you. And to Richo's point, don't sort of let it get to the point where you're kicking the can down the road and then, certainly reach out. I'm not suggesting don't reach out, but what I'm saying is if you can start with yourself and make sure that you've got yourself into a nice routine, that I get up in the morning, have a lemon, my hot water with lemon, and meditate, and then in the afternoon or whatever. So I think it's just so important because people that you're leading, particularly for leaders out there, the expectation of the people you're leading is you turn up as the best version of you. That's their expectation. Now, if you find yourself slipping, I think this is one thing I learned as a coach of a footy club, because as leaders, often we're sort of left to our own devices. But one of the great things about being involved in footy or being a CEO or being high up the org chart, you do have an amazing network. So reach out. Don't think you need to know everything. We can talk a bit about personality profiles. Maritza, you brought it up before. We do a lot of that. The old age of the Red Eagle managing, it's gone. It's done. It's finished. There's still certainly some, from a profiling point of view, there's certainly those people, but they've developed the empathy. But what they do is they ask questions. They admit that they're wrong. They ask for help. That's the sign of a great leader. So if you're sitting there thinking, but I'm running a company or I'm doing this, I can't show a vulnerable side, that's garbage. All right. Part of being a really good leader is asking for help, reaching out to someone, saying, look, Rich, I'm just having a really bad day, mate. Can you help me with this meeting? And so Richo helps with the meeting and then comes to me after the meeting and say, mate, let's go and have a coffee. What's going on? Oh, something going on at home, and my mind's, that's good leadership. And I think that shift away from that top-down approach is certainly happening, and that's a really big part of it. So just a couple of tips are, just really look after yourself. But if you're getting to that point, it's not weak to reach out. I had an amazing network coaching Sydney and coaching Melbourne. I was really fortunate, and I was always on the phone and asking people, how am I going? Am I going well? Is there anything I can do better? Et cetera, et cetera. So certainly it's not weak to reach out. And anyone thinking that, it couldn't be further from the truth. It's a sign. In fact, it's a sign of strength now, I would say. Absolutely.
Agreed. Paul, how do you find it with CEOs and leaders revealing this side to them? Like, I'm not feeling well, I'm struggling a little bit. The judgment that may come from shareholders or management. This guy's a bit off. Are we right to go with him? I'm finding that sort of stuff still exists. And
I think you're right, Tony. I think top down, but what I do notice with the CEOs, as soon as they open up to their staff, the staff are so willing to help them. There's probably with the org chart in terms of the board and whoever's above them, but certainly within the inner sanctum, I think I've seen some enormous change, and people are willing to help, shooting a text message straight away. We're having some really authentic conversations around that. So look, we know it's a work in progress, but I think, again, getting to leadership now compared to what it was 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago is dramatically different. The things that, Maritza, you mentioned around empathy, self-awareness, asking questions, admitting that I'm wrong, that wouldn't have happened, with all due respect to my coaches. And it was no, I'm not having a go at them, but it just wasn't part of their armor, because they didn't have time. Wallsy was a school teacher, JT, so he was working all day. David Parker was a lecturer. So, we're talking about these guys that worked extremely hard all day, and then they came to training, and it was just do this, do this, do this, do this. I think if we take a leaf out of the AFL book, the leaders now, Tony, are very vulnerable. I think, some of the coaches are on record as saying that's some of the biggest shift in the way they've changed their coaching away from this technical side of coaching. So, if it works in football, and I've seen it work, Tony, in the corporate world, but you're right, there's a way to go to break down the barrier in the overall organisational chart.
Are they better at building relationships now to the leaders? Whereas you just talked about the old school coaches, they didn't really build a relationship individually with people, whereas I feel like the good leaders now, they really are connected and build relationships with their staff or their players if they're a footy coach. I think that's something that's really changed as well and really works as far as leaders go. Yeah,
and again, to be fair to the guys we had, Richo, when I first started, they just didn't have time.
They didn't,
But I think on that, probably one of the things that annoys me the most when, at that level, Tony, is I'm busy. And what happens I notice is the leaders, they want to stay in the weeds. They want to stay in the business. Instead of getting out of the business and building relationships, Richo, what is my culture? How am I going with my staff? What is the CFO doing? That's their role. But it's really hard for leaders and exec teams to get out of the weeds because they're technically very good at what they do. And that's why they tend to get appointed to these C-suite positions. So I think the whole shift around mental health has to involve a notion of what is leadership. What's a leader of a family now? It's not getting the strap out maybe like it was 40 years ago and whacking the son on the backside and yelling at him for not putting his head over the ball in footy or whatever it is. So it extends further. It's males in general, isn't it? Guys, it's sort of just changing the notion, and I think it's got to change in all facets of life, and it translates to all facets of life too, which is the great thing.
One of the things that we've done, the Male Hug, by collaborating with Conscious Conversations, and I'm a massive advocate for communication with your wife or partner. I think that's because a lot of blokes that I know just don't do that, and I think if you start there, that's a really good place to start. It could minimise a lot of damage down the track, but I've seen it in business. I had a client that was, he was all over the place and had kept everything from his wife. And I just said to him, I said, you've got to bring her in. And he wouldn't do it, but we did it. And she just said to him, why didn't you talk to me? I would have supported you no matter what. So we sorted it out. They've moved on, but I'd hate to think what would have happened if that didn't take place. So it's just, it's talking, communication, being honest, raw, open things. One of my first encounters when I set this thing up, the Male Hug, was with Professor Pat McGorry. I spent some time with him, and he just said, the importance of talking, you can't measure it. if more men spoke early in the piece, then, you know, the world would be a much better place. So I think
I can't tell you, Tony, the number of players that have come into my office, just shut the door, had a conversation with me, and their body language, the way they exited my office compared to the way they come in, the weight of the world was off their shoulders. Suddenly, 100%. Suddenly they had this ally and someone that understood them and someone they could have a conversation with. And I must admit, for me, it was an incredible conversation, because as a manager and a leader of people, I need to know that information as well. So it's not a one-way street. It's actually a two-way street. Yeah. You're 100% right. I think that's the breakthrough moment where they think, oh, he hasn't judged me, or I'm actually feeling a lot lighter and I'm actually feeling better. I've now got an ally, whether it's your wife or you know, your brother or your son or father or whoever
let it out. Just talk about it. Seriously. It's that simple. The more you release, the lighter you feel, and it's incredibly simple. Yeah.
That old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved, right? It's definitely plays out. I'm absolutely loving this conversation, and I'm sure everyone else listening is also loving it. It's so important to talk about this stuff. But you talked about something earlier, Paul, and this is how we usually start our Conscious Conversations events, is by asking that question, how are you really? And we usually do that first up, but I really want to get into this group dynamic first. But I really want to ask you all on a personal level. I mean, we've all been through some pretty heavy shit the last couple of years, and whether it's about this pandemic or something else, but I'm checking in really. So maybe I'll go to you, Paul. How are you really right now?
Well, for those of you who don't know, I'm in America, and it's a hard question to answer, only because, Maritza, I don't really want to get into the COVID and the pandemic, but I can't tell you what a relief it is to be out of Australia. And so the reason I say that is because I was probably worse than I thought I was, and JT and I caught up a couple of times, but the oppression. And it really, I'm actually really angry. I'm really, really angry at what Australia has been put through and continues to be put through, and particularly Victoria. And I'm just really angry. It's just, and I'd probably, as I said, more angry having touched down over here and seeing how people live their lives. So yeah, I'm really angry, but by the same token, as an individual myself, who's now in a country that's normal and doesn't talk about COVID at all, and vaccines and all this sort of stuff on a daily basis, it's so talk about the weight of the world. But I probably didn't realize how angry I was until I actually, because I think you put up with it, and you have to. There's no other alternative, and you just try and find a way. But really angry, really pissed off, and really, really frustrated for everyone in Australia.
Thanks for sharing that. I think a lot of us are feeling the same way, and completely out of control of our next moves and what's to come. So like I said, a lot of us have gone through so much heaviness recently, and processing it can be so hard. And I suppose you've removed yourself from the situation here, so now it's all just sort of settling.
It's amazing because you're right, when you're in it, so you just, but when you understand it's the same pandemic, it's the same virus, the same, I give or take, the same doctors that are educated, roughly in the same environment. So nothing really changed other than, the mindset of the people that are running the country. I mean, it's just so dramatic. It's really quite confronting, really, when you look back on it.
I hope you find some peace there and settle down a little bit. Thank you for sharing that with us, Paul. John, I'll go to you next. How are you doing really at the moment? You've got a big, beautiful smile on your face right now, which is a good sign.
Well, look, I suppose just my nature is that I get really curious and interested in things. And I certainly haven't liked what's been going on in Australia, and also just the difference in the different ideologies across the different political parties in Australia and the different states, and what's going on, and the unnecessary level of control, but then also the conflict between citizens. I've found it really astounding. And, you know, Paul and I talked about it a lot, and Tony and I talked about it a lot. And, you know, where I went with it was I tried to think to myself, and I tried to explore, well, how have I created this? What have I done to contribute to things being the way they are? I'm 61, you know, and I've been around a while, and I realised that, you know, back in the 70s, my mum and dad used to go down to the town hall and listen to the politicians speak and stand up and ask them questions. But when I hit my 20s, there was too much on television, and I abandoned that. And I've actually never, ever been politically active in my life. And so probably where this pandemic has changed me is that I've decided to get politically active. Now, I don't want to go into politics. That's not my path. But man, can I have some conversations with some politicians, and I can stand up and allow my thoughts to be heard, and challenge people on what they're doing and what they're thinking. And perhaps if more of us do that, we can change the landscape here in Australia, because it can't go on the way it's going right now. It's, you know, and if I let myself feel it, yeah, I'm pissed off about it. But, you know, I've got to take action to change it. On the other side of it too is that when it was hard and I needed to gain perspective around it, otherwise I was going to drive myself mad. And I just contemplated for a while, and I realised that both my sets of grandparents lived through 2 world wars, a pandemic and a depression. And so I realised that whilst this was tough, it's never going to touch what they went through. So I used it as an opportunity to toughen up a little bit, I suppose. But yeah, doing okay now. Feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
That's good. I mean, you said taking action to change it. And I suppose we can only take that action on a small scale within ourselves, like you mentioned, and how we perceive things to be and how we allow things to affect us. And do we go into the deep anger and fear, or do we step back and just, you know, take each day as it comes? I mean, I know personally my journey's just been an intense roller coaster that I cannot get off. And some days I'm great, and other days I'm miserable, and some days I'm scared, and other days I'm angry. And to be honest, no one's asked me how I'm really doing, but I'm over the roller coaster right now. I just want some stability. That's how I'm feeling. I'm nauseous with the roller coaster. But yeah, perception is everything. Thank you so much for sharing that, John. Tony, what about you? How are you doing, really?
Well, John and I have spoken quite a bit about this stuff, but I today I'm a bit flat. Today would have been my father's 73rd birthday. So he left us 12 years ago. He's quite young. So yeah, I'm a bit flat today, but happy birthday, Dad. But yeah, so just in relation to this stuff, I mean, Victoria is going through some stuff that, wow, and Ruthie and John and I, you know, things really, they need to be handled a little bit differently. I think there's a lot of stuff. I deal with a lot of clients in the hospitality industry and small business that have just been absolutely decimated. And for a guy that's set up a mental health organisation to help people, you know, my boardroom's always been that safe space where clients can talk about anything. And I'm seeing some good people, and it breaks my heart genuinely that they're finished, and that is just not good enough. And that's really, we've got to be very diplomatic here, but I think there's a lot of good people that have been absolutely decimated, and I hate to see what's going to happen, you know, for their next stage of life. But frustrated, angry, really, maybe we can have a chat off air, Ruzi.
Yeah,
it is a lot. It's been heavy, and thank you for sharing that, and also the condolences and for your father's passing anniversary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Richo, passing the baton to you. How are you doing, really?
Well, just like everyone else, I've been frustrated. It's been incredible the last, who would have ever thought we'd go through something like this? We're basically nearly 300 days in Melbourne lockdown. So it's been frustrating, and like everyone, it's had its challenges, but I guess I've tried to look at things with glass half full most of the time, and I've got a young family, so that's given me time to really spend with my two young daughters of 4 and 18 months. I was a late starter, guys and girls, so I guess that's the positive for me. I've been able to spend a lot more time with them. But as Tony said, I'm frustrated because I've got a lot of mates in small business and hospitality, and they've been decimated. So I just want things to move. And as John said, there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel coming up this weekend. So hopefully, a lot of friends can get back on their feet. But it's going to be tough, and it's probably more important than ever to stay connected with them. But yeah, I guess I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic, and I guess I do feel grateful that I've got my young daughters at the moment that have kept me positive and something to focus on, which has been good. And personally, I was still able to work through this. A lot of people haven't been able to, so I've got to be grateful for that as well.
Sort of be good to be a kid around now, where we have no memory of what on earth
I didn't have to do homeschooling either.
Yes,
I've heard a lot of horror stories there. So
I've done
thank the Lord they're young.
5 terms of homeschooling in this house. So it's been we're professional homeschoolers. And Friday they go back. So I'm thrilled about that. I think that's been far too long. All right. Thanks so much, all of you, for sharing that. I know there's a lot of struggle and heaviness at the moment, and we can only hope that things get better. I'm going to throw it out there. Whoever wants to answer this last question, if there's someone out there who's listening and they are struggling and they don't know what the first step is that they should take, because perhaps they don't know who to turn to or how to even start a conversation, what's your advice on taking that first step? And maybe John, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, there's, well, firstly, I would say that if there is somebody out there that doesn't have somebody to talk to, just go to themailehug.com.au.
Well done, Johnny.
Nice connection, and there's buddies there waiting to play a support role. And on the flip side, if you're aware that one of your friends is perhaps struggling a little bit, like Matthew said before, there's a bit of radio silence on the WhatsApp group, or you just haven't heard from them for a little while, just reach out, do a bit of discovery, find out how things are going. And the worst case scenario is that you save somebody's life, and the best case scenario is you get to have a chat with a friend, but certainly the Male Hug creates that destination for somebody who doesn't feel like they have a destination.
Yeah, well done, Johnny. I just want to say our buddy service, we are about to launch a 1-800 buddy hotline, so people can just ring up and they'll be connected to a buddy. So we're going to launch that in the next week or two. It's very important. Reach out to somebody and just let it out. That's the most important thing that you can do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think and normally it's sort of someone you really trust, someone that really well. So do that. But I'm going to touch on something that JT mentioned. Is we got to stop this division. I mean, this is ridiculous what's going on at the moment. We have to stop this division. We have to stop this hatred. We have to stop this garbage that's happening. We have to consume our lives with more love and generosity, and because we're going nowhere at the moment, and people are going to feel more and more isolated because of politicians, and I can't get into a pub this week, and I can get into a pub, and it's absolutely disgusting. And this relates to people probably not knowing who they can reach out to, because within families, within communities, within, we're hearing stories now, we're hearing plenty of them, and it's going to continue over the next 2 or 3 weeks. That's a really big thing. So open up your heart, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Stop thinking about yourselves predominantly, particularly if you're like Richo and me, and I'm not sure Tony and JT, I know, but I'm in a good position, so you know, people like ourselves have got to start to open up and got to start to help people and got to stop this division. You know, it's a lot harder if you've lost your business, Tony, and things like that. But certainly there's enough people out there that all they're thinking about is themselves. And it just drives me crazy. All they care about is, well, I've got a job. I don't care about anyone else. I'm getting a paycheck, bugger them. You know, let's shut everything down. Let's keep everything closed. You know, we can't exist like this, JT. You mentioned it before. It's just so, as I said, it just makes me so angry.
Yeah. You're spot on, Paul. And for me, you know, my wife and I are still, we can work from home. I can run the accounting practice from home but I'm dealing with so many clients that have just decimated. But I reckon those that must reach out and support, help, give, do whatever you can. Because yesterday I went up to see my mother. On the way back, I stopped over on the side of the road in Nicholson Street, and there was a line, went for several blocks, people queuing up for food. I just broke down. I actually filmed the video. I sent it off to a few friends, but I actually had a few tears, and I've never seen this in Nicholson Street, Brunswick. And that was just, Roosie, what you've said there, mate, you're 100%. Support one another, stop the division. You know, I'm hearing stories of families and friendships, and this is absurd. Enough of and that's creating a pandemic called mental health. So enough.
I'd like to. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, you go, JT.
No, I was just going to say I'd like to add something there, a little bit of a story, and just to add on to what Paul's saying, because this conflict is ridiculous, but conflict doesn't come from somebody else. It comes from both sides. And we can't wait for other people to stop being nasty. We've got to handle it ourselves, you know. And I got a life lesson once, and I'm going to embarrass you a little bit here, Matthew, but you gave me a powerful life lesson once in 1999 at the MCG one Friday night, just before the game started, and you grabbed me and said, JT, can you give my hammies a quick stretch? I'm a little bit tight. And you lay down on the ground a few metres inside the boundary line, and I was kneeling over you, stretching you, had your leg up over my shoulder, and there was a bunch of opposition fans leaning over the fence, giving it to you, and it was vitriolic, it was abusive. And I said to you, how do you feel about that, Matthew? And you just looked at me and said, Johnny, I love those people. He said, those people pay my wages. He said, it's footy, it's not personal. And I thought, wow, and that's so true. People can do what they want, but we don't have to respond with aggression. We can actually, as Paul said, we can change it, and we can use love and kindness, you know, and it's our kindness that's going to get us through this. And you taught me something that day, Matthew.
Oh, thanks for that, Johnny. I think it's important to be kind. I think we've all, you know, seen a lot of nastiness recently. So look, we're opening up this weekend. Reach out. Connect with people you haven't seen for a while. And if you're still not hearing from someone, pick up the phone, because I reckon there's going to be a lot of people that are almost going to struggle coming out of this situation we're in. They've been locked up. There's going to be some anxieties out there. So if you're not hearing from someone, as we said on the WhatsApp group, you know, ring someone you haven't spoken to for a while, like Tony with Talktober. Ring someone every day. Try and chat to someone. Get them out. Get them going again, because I reckon people are going to need a kickstart. And I'll tell you one thing I've learned in the last 2 years. Whenever I felt a bit ordinary and a bit down, and it's so simple, and Roosie talked about it before, whatever gets you going, whether it's you go for a walk, you walk the dog, you go for a jog if you can, the bike, get moving. Get out and get moving. Whenever I feel a bit flat, if I get out and get the heart rate up just a little bit, I'll guarantee you, when I get home, I just feel that little bit better and a little bit more positive, and create good habits. And you know, I think that can be something that moving forward can get you going again.
Thank you so much for ending that on a positive. I know we're all feeling angry and frustrated and completely pissed off right now, but like you said, there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. It's coming, and you know, there's brighter days ahead. The best piece of advice I ever got was from Neil Donald Walsh, who said, stop making each other wrong. And I'm going to probably finish on that today, is just stop it. Stop. No one's wrong. No one's right. Everyone has their own opinion, and that's okay. And that's how we deal with life. So stop making each other wrong. Thank you all so very much for sharing yourselves so openly and vulnerably here today. I know, you all got your own things going on, but you spent this hour with us, and I'm sure it's helped so many people who are listening here, who are live, and who will also be playing the replay and recording back.
Maritza, I just want to say something in relation to all this craziness that's going on at the moment. I read a quote yesterday, and it really resonated with me. And don't accept or reject anybody, just play your part, and that's it. And if we can all do that, I reckon there's going to be a good world out there on the other side of this.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you for saving me as I choked there as well. Good timing. Thank you, everyone. Again, as you know, we've talked about the male hug, so don't hesitate to head over to their website. I think it's in the chat as well. We've popped the link of the male hug in the chat. If you want someone to talk to, they are there for you. Women too. You'll take women on board if they need a chat as well, Tony. I'm sure.
I just said. I mean, we're encouraging men to speak to their partners, their wives. That's where it starts. That's where the healing starts. So do it. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Thank you again, Roosie. Thanks, John. Thanks, Richo. Thanks, Tony. And thanks, everyone, for attending today. Take care and love to everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.